So I would like to open the board for questions. I can see here one first questions, please.
Thank you very much. And by way of introduction and apology, my name is Mairead McGuinness. I'm First Vice President of Parliament, responsible for religious dialogue. So I came really to absorb some very interesting information, and thank you for that. And I'm leaving for another meeting. So it's not fair to ask you a question. But perhaps someone in the room, and I think I have a colleague here, will try and take a sense of the issue I want to raise. How do we get the knowledge and the depth of the analysis here to grassroots and to community? For the reasons that we're here, which is about human rights and women and equality, but also for the very important reason of to reduce tensions between religions, both in Europe and outside, because frankly that is also part of the whole human rights debate. And to just add my sincere thanks to the groups for coming together and to all our very impressive speakers for what they've given us today. And I'm sorry that I really can't stay, but thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. I will ask who would like to answer to this question.
I can always say something. Well, I think we have to have people-to-people contact. You know, before I worked in politics, I worked in arts in a community setting and worked with both urban and rural communities. So I worked with very mixed communities in Manchester and Liverpool, but then I also worked in rural County Durham, where people had no contact with ethnic minority groups or people of different faiths. But I chose, as a community arts worker, to bring different communities together, and I saw the transformation. But actually what you need is you need all that scaled up, and that means that you need to have it as government policy, and that means that you need investment and money put into it. So it's political from my perspective now. And actually I came into politics because I realized that I couldn't do any more. You know, I had to be in a different position to say the things that I knew to be true. So I think it is about bringing people together, and it is about programs at all levels of education where we have to do that. And when you get children together in a room and they haven't been exposed to hatred and they haven't been exposed to prejudice and division, children actually learn to live with each other. And I think, yes, we've got a big task ahead of us in terms of bringing adult communities together. But if we don't start with the next generation, like as soon as they're born, bringing those young people together before they have those false assumptions, actually, then we're not going to go anywhere. So we need some real changes, I think, in policy. And that requires governments at all levels now, but particularly, I think, at member state levels. You know, I'm on the Education and Culture Committee, and we don't have, I mean, education is a member state competence, but I would really like some of the things that I know to be true, because I've seen that transformation. I would like the member states to take that up. And it's why I mentioned the report that I did, because it was an own initiative report, so it's a recommendation. It requires that kind of political will behind it. So I think that grassroots groups know how to do this, Mairead. I think they know how to do it. And it's actually this end we need the will within political institutions here, but particularly within member state governments.
So I'm sure we will be able to collect all the other answers and send them to you. Thank you. So please, Beatrice.
Sorry, did you want
Yes, thank you very much, Mairead. I will give you my answer, but just very briefly, I think that we are here for a political reason. We are representatives, elected representatives of the European citizens. So our mandate here is not just to have hearings, discussion, and to be very understanding and to share all the knowledge, of course, but we are here to make legislation, because we need to grant the rights of the citizens, being them of a religion or another, and we have to grant the right to a free belief, this kind of fundamental rights. That is what I think is our mandate. And the objective and the only reason for a politician to be in a public mandate like this is to solve problems. If we are not here to solve problems, we with concrete solutions, we have no sense. So this is why I think that the outcome of this discussion should be to find concrete solutions, not just to be, very comprehensive and very debating. No, to find that. And thank you very much for being here and for your leading of this group. Thank you.
Thanks, Mairead.
Thank you. Matty, you had an answer too.
Yes, so when we talk about education, and I think we need to look at things for solutions as a long-term measure. So as you said, when policymakers, I think they need to be aware of what they're dealing with. And that's our job to be able to do that. And that's what you're representing. So I totally agree. So with regards to what we need to do, especially when we're talking about, on this occasion, it's about Islam and women's rights. First of all, we need to find out this one way is for education. How do we go about education? So one way is to find out what is these misconceptions and misinterpretations first. Find out what is it really in Islam and what isn't. Because what I find it quite difficult and challenging is the fact that when somebody, for example, comes to Europe, they have their own cultural belief and they want to integrate into society, but they have their own way of belief system. So you, for example, say this is the way you need to practice. They say, well, it's part of my religion to to beat my wife because it says in my Quranic text, because they don't even understand the Quranic text. These people need to be educated. I have come across people saying that, I have to have 4 wives. And if my first wife doesn't agree with me, then I can have 2 second. I have been approached to say, well, it is part of my religious practice. They kind of excuse their behavior when it comes to gender imbalance or gender inequality with men related to religion. I think we need to really go into understand what the teaching of the Quran is and separate it from the cultural tradition that is being practiced by certain groups. And I think that's one way of looking at it. So when policymakers are making their decision, they are actually aware of it. This is nothing to do with the Islamic teaching. This is something made up by somebody at a certain point of time, and it's now become a part of practice. I think this is one thing that we need to make you aware of, personally. Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew. I'd like to see if there are other questions, please.
Thank you so much. Well, there is a big difference between what we want and what we have had. Almost 15th century, we are living with Islam. When we speak about rights, it means politics. Rights out of politics doesn't exist. Then this is the reality of the world. And when you talk about Islamic rights, then you have to accept an Islamic government. How could you realize an Islamic right without a secular in a secular government? It isn't possible. We are talking about a modern society. Modern society means without religious, without governmental religious. If Mr. Azmaesh, who I don't know the name of this gentlewoman, Mrs. Haven? Yeah, Mrs. Haven. You are talking about a positive side of Islam. But who are you? You have to talk with your Islamic community. Could you go to inside of Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and etc., and publish your opinion? European country, I think so, the European Parliament don't need such a seminar. Why? The issue is inside Iran, not in Belgium, not in the US.
Okay.
Then the European Parliament must...
Can we save some time and let them answer to that? I think the question is clear.
Just one. Then the European Parliament must talk with the leader of Iran, Mr. Khamenei, how we, the European community and the Iranian community and the Iranian government go ahead in a moderate manner, actually. I don't think that the women's rights in Islam is compatible with the modern society. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Now, who is going to answer to that? Okay, so we have their question.
Okay. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for a wonderful panel. My name is Reem Alfahad, and my question is about the ban of the hijab in the name of secular spaces. So I grew up in a Muslim community, and I've always had a very empowering understanding of the hijab. For me, it's always been this idea that I'm taking ownership of my body, and I get to choose who has the privilege to see my hair and my body the way that I choose. And entering and beginning to live in more Western spaces, I've encountered that as a minority, the onus is often on us, whether that's a racial minority, an LGBTQ minority, or a religious minority, to assimilate within the majority society. And so when the question of the banning the hijab comes along, I see it as the same concept of the Muslim woman needs to assimilate in order to make the majority more comfortable. And so looking at the question that is posed, are women's rights in Islam compatible with modern society? My question is modern society compatible? Are they ready to accept Muslim women?
Okay, thank you. Next question here, please.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting conference. It's the first time that I heard about it. Was a taboo domain about the women's rights in Islam. So I'm very agree with European parliamentary from Spain. We need a Quran and an Islam together. Sunni, Shia, I don't know the other one, to put it together, and this is the interpretation. Women's rights in Islam, my opinion, there are not. And if I am speaking only from the Saudi Arabian women, that they are semi-esclavagists, they have no rights. So for me, it's a semi-esclavagist society. It has nothing to do with our democratic society. For the Mrs. Heaven, what is the right for divorce for a woman in Islam and the Quran? She has no rights, okay? So she cannot ask for a divorce. Sharia law has nothing to do with the women's rights. Women's rights is for all the religion. I'm very happy that you say this. Sharia law has nothing to do with human rights. It's the same thing for Saudi Arabia, where they have this, same thing Iran, and so on. I think that a solution for the Islam woman in a European country. I'm German, and I have a very good experience with a contact person in the government organization where every refugee family is going to ask for help, any help, financial and so on. It is a person that is responsible only for gender equality, and this person can answer to the religious problem. And so in the German society, we don't have too much honor crime. Then you speak, I was very impressed for the women who are every time killed because they don't want to marry this one. And anyway, in the Islamic society, a woman cannot marry another man with another religion. I mean, it's a very hard non-respect for human rights, clearly. So this can be a solution. In Germany, there are pilot institutions that are doing that, and they have a good experience.
Okay, thank you. There was a question there.
My name is Christina Waschkewitz. I'm also from Germany. Hello. And I work as a social worker. So, and the effectiveness of my work depends on the effectiveness of your work. So that's totally a very important thing. And in contradiction to the speaker before, I really think this topic is very important for European countries. So what I like to tell you is that we observe that, because I work in a refugee camp, that we observe that for the Afghanian women, it's mostly Afghanian women, all the migration process is an act of liberation and the possibility of education. And they stay Muslim, and they are very devoted to their faith. So that is how they describe themselves. Whereas the men, for them, the whole process of migrating into another country, they feel it like a loss of power. So what happens is then that they compensate this thing about, in a way of becoming more backward to their traditions. And the argument or the justification of their behavior is through the Quran. But it's just a justification. And so they are against integration of women and child, of female child. And that's a problem. And we do have to know how to deal with this. Because this leads to separation in society. And I would like to have an answer on this. Because we have to do something.
Thank you. One last question I would like to take up, and then we go to the answers. So one last question. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Umayya Bidek. I'm from Morocco. I was brought up as a Muslim, and I lived my whole life in Morocco, which means that I lived in where things are happening. And I'm not looking at it from a European view. I'm looking at it as a Moroccan from Morocco. My concern about the Quran is that there's two major parameters that makes it really dangerous. The first one is that it's valid for all times and places. And the second one, it's the word of God, which means that it's the truth for the believers. And in front of me, I have Surah Nisa, which is the surah dedicated to women. And I can't see anything positive about it. The first thing is the marriage. It says that you can marry one woman, 2, 3, or 4. Or, and here it's O, which means or, but in ancient Arabic, it means and your slaves. Which means that you can have all a harem of 40 women, and it's still okay. And also the second one is the inheritance. And it says that God says that for your sons, twice as much for your daughters. So I can't see anything fair about it. And the perfects in the moderate Islam I come from, it says that, well, woman's money, it's her money, but the man's money, it's his family's money. But I don't see that in the modern society. And therefore, women's rights in Islam cannot be compatible with the modern society, and shouldn't be, actually. And I'm for a really secular world, and Islam should be spiritual more than a practice or politics. Otherwise, we have what's happening now, and it's only getting worse because of all the interpretations. And Quran, as an Arabic speaker, I speak and write Arabic perfectly, and I can't understand 90% of it. Because if it's the word of God, So why is it so hard for me to understand it? I've been reading Arabic my whole life. So that's why there's a lot of issues about the Quran, and we can't solve them unless we look at it in a really neutral view, really to be objective. Otherwise, it's a big problem, and I can really understand people who can't criticize the Quran, because of course it's really it's something anchored in your mind. You cannot question it. But once you start questioning it, you start looking at the word differently and in the most peaceful way. And I have also about the equality, women and men. It says that الرجال قوامون على النساء, which means men are responsible for women, and they are responsible, isn't it? It says that they are responsible, but also it means, it says in a way that they are better. And also after it says that بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض, which means that the men will spend from their money depending on how much they have. And right after it, and this is the best part, it says that if you fear women, your wives, not sleeping with you, you can first talk with them, second, leave them alone in bed, and the third, beat them up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now we have some questions which probably can only be answered by Dr. Azmesh, so I propose we start with answer. Yes.
And after about the question regarding the Quran, etc., so Jerry has the answer for the first question, and after regarding the question about Quran.
Okay, I will take note of what our expert is recommending us. But anyway, let me give not some answers, but my impressions on the different questions that you have stated today. Thank you very much, above all. But I would like to say only some things which are maybe not answers. I don't think there are cute answers for what you said. But first of all, I think that for sure this is an European question. Absolutely. I think this is an issue that is directly affecting the private and the public life of the European citizens, of all of them, of all who are Muslims and all those who have another religion. So that is why I think that is part of our mandate to get involved in this and to deal with all the problems we are facing and try to find a solution and to impulse and to foster any possible way to move forward, because I think this is where we are. For me, it's quite surprising that, as you said, that your question is much more of about if the modern society compatible with women's rights in Islam. This is an assumption of that there are some rights that are specifically for women that are Islamic, and that are other women's rights in the world, and that modern society is something that is outside Islam. I don't believe that. I think there are modern societies with Islamic or Muslim or other religions citizens. So the societies are modern despite of the religion of their citizens. This is different. Can be a majority of a religion or not. And as I said before, there are not Muslim rights. I would like to see where are the Muslim rights. Is there any book with the Muslim rights that I can read? I would love to read it, but I think there are not. The definition of human rights is universal. Are the rights that are indivisible for all human beings. And that affects to everybody in the world. That's what the only thing we have in common, human rights. So women's rights are human rights that are the rights to everybody in the world. So the question about the compatibility is about democracy, respecting human rights, and non-democratic regimes which are not respecting human rights. That's my point of view. And this affects especially to women, because we usually forget that we are more than half of the population of the world. Are not the rights of a minority that should be respected, for sure. But we are not talking about minorities. We are talking about the majority of the world. We are at least a 50% in each and every country in the world. It's the only thing where we are, at the same level. So, regarding this, I think that we should talk not about compatibility, about between a religion and a format, a model of society. And regarding rights, I think that the way we have to look forward is how to find the way and, let's say, the practical element, the practical tool that can make any society in the world, being of a majority of Muslims or not, to become a modern society. And this is, I would say this is my word, a modern society is incompatible with a fundamentalist regime. So we cannot find a religious model of a government that can be compatible with modern. Because it's impossible, because if you have a specific confession as your governance way, you are discriminating and you're putting a part of the society aside. So that's the difference. Rights and democracy, etc., and religion as a guaranteed right for your private life. And related to other questions, I would say that's a very good approach that you said about the Sharia has nothing to do with human rights. It's nothing to do with the rule of law, in fact, because calling a law to something that is completely against human rights, and it's based on interpretation and in different approaches across the centuries, it's impossible to be compatible with modernity. Thank you.
Jerry, to which of the questions would you like to answer?
I'll keep you surprised by that. So, to the gentleman here, I totally disagree with you. I disagree from the context of when we look at the fundamental abuses of human rights, when we look at the discussion around this particular subject. We can't just talk about it in the context of something that might happen in the Islamic Republic of, etc., etc. When I talk about the abuses of women and girls, whereas honour-based abuse, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, domestic abuse. All these abuses are happening around us. They're within our homes, right across the European Union, right across the so-called developed world. And that's why my comments were quite loaded around this is not something just happening over there somewhere, not in my backyard. It is happening in all of our backyards, whether we like it or not. And the reality of it is that none of us should like it. None of us should tolerate it. We have got, whatever our role is, a professional and a moral imperative to act. Honour killings of young women, primarily young women, but not exclusively, young men are involved as well as victims, are happening in the so-called developed world. They're happening across the European Union. Today, it is happening. To the lady here, when she talks about Sharia courts, when I talked earlier around the subject of community-driven solutions, I'm absolutely wedded to the notion around community-driven solutions. Given the deeply ingrained cultural nature of some of the offending, communities have got to want to change. Man-made cultural practices must be changed by, when I say man, I talk about men and women. But they are changeable. Community-driven solutions is not about accessing communities through community gatekeepers. It is not about mediation. It is not about seeking some form of justice through paralegal systems like, for example, Beth Din or through Sharia courts. It is absolutely not about those processes, because those processes are patriarchal-driven. The offending across the board is driven by gender inequality and patriarchy. To the social worker sitting at number 62, to a social worker from Germany, absolutely endorse what you have said in terms of your experiences around what we see is some of that imbalance in terms of women's rights, men's rights, and how the power and control balance shifts when women are educated and women coming and migrating, seeking education, employment, and with that then empowerment. My experiences, certainly from the UK, would definitely point to and support what you're saying. And we'll see that migration and immigration, whether it's through marriage and through other processes, where better educated women are being targeted by their naive, uneducated spouses because of that shift in balance and the power and control balance. So I absolutely endorse what you said. To the young lady and her question around the hijab, fantastic question. It was really good. But of course, that is your personal choice. And it was exceptionally eloquent in terms of how you described your individual and personal choice, because I think you were empowered to take that approach. And, I absolutely salute that approach. It's absolutely fantastic. But the stark reality of it is that many young women and girls and women don't have that choice, because the choice is forced on them. It's not a free and independent choice for some.
So, Matty, what are your answers?
With regards to wearing a hijab, and the question you raised, I think is really good, and it empowers you to do that. It makes you feel good. We need to see you can be a Muslim, wear a hijab, and you can be a Muslim and not wear a hijab. What makes you feel comfortable is a piece of clothing. So it's like banning not wearing trousers. It's the same thing as banning not wearing a headscarf. But it doesn't say anything in the Quran that it is part of a Quranic text that one needs to wear a hijab in order to be a Muslim. So it does not state that in the Quran, but it is a personal choice in modern society to wear a hijab that makes you feel good, and if one doesn't want to, it's still a Muslim person. And so I think we need to look at it as a piece of clothing.
Julie?
I maybe answer some of the questions in my closing remarks, if that's okay, but I feel that the panelists have given some absolutely fantastic answers, and thank you everybody for the questions and for coming to what I think has been a really important and sometimes very difficult conversation. So thank you. When the Cologne attacks happened, we experienced again across Europe a very anti-Muslim, a very kind of racist Islamophobic response to that. And in this European Parliament, the GUI NGL group had a really fantastic campaign, which was "Don't use my body for your racism." And I thought that was a very timely, important campaign to separate out what was happening, because all violence against women and girls is unacceptable. I went on a FEMM mission, a Women's Rights Committee mission to Munich to look at how Germany was welcoming refugees. And as part of the mission, we had a meeting with the police who are, engaged in trying to support, really, the local authorities and the work that they're doing. And the police officer said to us, he said, probably nobody's been talking about the amount of violence that white men perpetrate against women during the Oktoberfest. Okay, so let's remember that. All violence against women and girls is unacceptable in whatever form it takes, wherever it is happening, no matter who is perpetrating, who is the perpetrator. In terms of, just want to draw your attention to a campaign that began in the UK. I was reminded of this when you started talking, Jerry. It's a campaign called Counting Dead Women. And a British woman in the first week of the year, and I can't remember how many years the campaign's been going now, but she noticed in the newspapers something like 5 women had been killed by their intimate partners within the first week of the new year. And so she began this campaign to put onto a website, and now there's a social media page about it, the names and the biographies of all the women who are killed, regardless of what their ethnicity is, regardless of their religion. The fact is they're women who are being killed, mostly by intimate partners. And it's a very important campaign. It's going global. If it's not in your country, why don't you start it up? It's a fantastic campaign. Because these are hidden victims most of the time, and they're all different ethnicities and they're all different religions, but they're all victims. I wanted also to draw attention to the fantastic anti-FGM campaigner, a young Muslim from Bristol, Fama Mohammed, who at the age of 13 began a campaign in my country against FGM, and last year was awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Bristol, aged only 19, for her incredible work. Just finally to say what an important platform the European Parliament is and the European Union is for defending human rights. And I am personally very sad that my country has made a decision not to be part of this platform, because I think the work that we do here in the European Union is of immense importance, and I don't see this level of this kind of platform and this level of engagement actually in these issues at this crucial time in my own country. So I am very sad that we shall be leaving the European Union.
Thank you, Julie. Now I would like to give the stage to Dr. Azmayesh to make a summary on all the questions we heard.
Thank you very much. I would like to attract your attention, especially for what you said about the Quran, that it is not enough to read a certain passage from the Quran and to say that it is written in the Quran. It is true that it is written in the Quran, but in its social and historical case. It means it is written a lot of time in the Quran, La ilaha, which means God doesn't exist. There is no existence for any God. So if you take it out of from its context, it means that the Quran deny and neglect totally the reality of the absolute existence, and the world vision of the Quran is based on kufr, and it is not true, because it is written La ilaha illallah, so other than one and unique God. So you have necessity to have a complete look at the verses of the Quran according to a chronological manner. It is not enough that something is written in the Quran, that you can get an order from it, because it can be, and certainly it is done, according to a deep research, historical research, when you do, that it is abrogated by another verse, which is better than one. So the principle of the revelation of all of the verses of the Quran is the principle of naskh and nasiyah. Naskh means abrogation. So there are certain quantity of verses in the Quran which are abrogated by another ones. So the reason is that when Prophet Muhammad started to talk with his people, he would like to educate them by a gradual manner, by a step-by-step manner of teaching. So what is written and you explain is true, but it is the half of reality. We must look completely at the Quran and extract all of the teachings of the Quran. It is important. It is very, very important matter regarding the right of human being, the right of citizenship in the Quran, because these are not contrary of what is taught the modern values, not at all. Go back to the British Museum and have a look at the cylinder of human rights written 2,500 years ago by Cyrus the Great. And it was the base of the teachings of all of the spiritual masters regarding the place of mankind in the universe and the rights of mankind, which is not the political right. It has nothing to do with the politics. Go and read the books of Hegel, the German philosopher, about natural right. That from the moment that then a fetus is conceived in the womb of the mother, it is one of the children of Adam and Eve. And it has the crown of the majesty of God upon his head, according to the verse of the Quran. فَكَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. So, Quran is based absolutely on the respect for gender neutrality and gender equality. As you know, because you are American girl, lady, so there is distinction, like in French language, between masculine and feminine words. Rajul and Nisa, man and woman. But when the Quran would like to talk about mankind, about human being, it doesn't use any word which has a gender weight in it. It doesn't talk about Rajul meaning Nisa, like it is in French language. Home means woman as well. But, or in Spanish as well. But in Quran, when it is talking about human rights and human being, it talks not about Rajul or Nisa, it talks about Al-Insan and Nas. It talks about children of Adam, Bani Adam. It talks about Bashar. So it is genderless. And
sorry, can I reply?
No, let me finish.
Just a little
go on.
Remark. About the gender, yes. The Arabic is really precise. And the verbs are also for, even for two people, is different than yes. three, and is different than one. Absolutely. And for one, when I read it more than one time in my life, the whole book, and I know that when it talks with the humankind, it talks with in a masculine verbs.
Give me an example. I will give you 1,000 examples.
I can give you 1,000 examples as well.
Give.
Because it's really precise.
When it is talking about mankind, it is giving the example about Rajul. It talks about
it's
Rajul.
It's not Rajul, but it's the masculine.
No, it is, you are talking about the grammatical aspect
exactly.
of the Arabic language.
Of the Arabic language.
The Quran, because Quran is revealed in Arabic language.
Exactly.
Yes, it is
That's
the grammatical aspect. No, it is other things. I am talking about the word of al-rajul. For example, in Iran of today, when they would like to talk about the right of a citizen to become candidate for the presidency, it is said, rajul siyasi. A political person is a rajul, meaning women as well.
It's the same as in French. It's for
yes,
the human and for men as well.
No,
it's exactly the same.
No, it is not exactly the same. Because al-insan is inni ja'ilun fil ard khalifa. So I would like to pose on the earth my representative. So this khalifa is named Adam. And وَكَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, all of the children of Adam, regardless their gender, men and women. وَكَرَّمْنَا, we gave them karamat to all of them.
Yes, of course.
So, Ya ayyuhan nas, Ya ayyuhan nas, it is genderless.
Yes.
O people, we created you from one man and one woman. Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakar wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila. So it is genderless.
Exactly, but my point is, when God speaks to both genders, he speaks in two different ways. He speaks.
I'm afraid this is going to be too much into the depths, so maybe we can postpone this into the depth discussion. So Dr. Azmesh has time to answer to all the other questions, maybe a little bit. Okay?
I only have one remark that I forgot. It's
really, we're running out of time, and we will be thrown out of the room. So please,
sorry.
Can we continue later?
Yes.
Yes. So I am going to finish this discussion by talking about the fact that it is true that by the misinterpretation of the verses of the Quran and bringing out of the context, historical context and social context, the verses of the Quran, and talk about the half of the verses and not paying attention to the chronological order of the verses, a lot of things which are said in the Quran and abrogated and annihilated by other verses. There is a big misconception about Islam and the Quranic teachings, as I explained in the beginning. But it is necessary for us, for all of us, not to be dogmatic, to be flexible, to have a look and put away what is in our mind regarding the Islam, and go back to the Quran and show. You told me that you learn the Arabic language is your maternal language, but when you read the Quran, you cannot understand 90% of it. So it is true. So it is a matter of study. The Quran is not a religious book at all. What does it mean? It means the Quran is composed of 6,346 verses, and the number of all of the verses regarding Shariat law are 250 verses. It is about 80% of whole book. It's important. The Quran is not a book of Shariat. The Shariat is fabricated by the clergy. It is man-made, and for this reason, according to the Quran, you can abrogate it and put it away. The teachings of the Quran are different than fiqh, or what is fabricated by the mullah. This is the reality. But we must have the open heart. Okay? Thank you very much.